which is metering, showback, and billing. Now, the goal here is that the cloud consumer gets an overview of the consumed resources. This means he is able to view the both aggregated and detailed consumption metrics for users' instances, and no matter in which cloud environment or hypervisor is actually running, he has a single pane of glass where he sees an aggregation of all the different consumption data that are collected from the underlying infrastructure. So CloudForms does not have a magic trick to gather consumption data. It needs to be provided by the underlying cloud environment and the infrastructure providers, but it aggregates them in a single pane of glass. CloudForms can also translate those consumption metrics from gigabytes and megahertz and virtual CPUs to dollars, for example. So it is able to translate it into monetary units, and this allows the cloud consumer to get a feeling of how much does he actually consume and what costs does this incur. CloudForms is not a full-fledged billing engine, so it has neither very complex rating rules and discounting schemes, for example, nor has it the follow-up processes that are required to actually do full and judicially compliant billing and for example, payment checks and all the underlying processes that need to be done to actually do real full-fledged billing. So we suggest that for that purpose, CloudForms would then use an API call to transfer the consumption data to a rating or billing engine or an ERP system for internal calculations. So what this use case entails is the CloudForms continuously monitors the underlying infrastructure providers for consumption data, collects them and aggregates them and presents them to the user, and also might be able to send them out to billing and rating engines. So let's look at what this looks like to the consumer. I'm leaving Satellite now, I'm going back into CloudForms, and I'm still logged in as a consumer. So I'm going back to the, I'm navigating to service catalog to see what services are actually running. And I see there's my services. Those 4 instances are currently running. And I'm now navigating to the reports. And here there's a chargeback report. And as you can see, this is a scheduled report that runs basically daily. I could even now request a specific report. So I could go there, select the chargeback report, and sorry, misclicked. Open the chargeback report and queue it and get a new consumption information report created. However, I would like to reuse an existing one because I just created all the various different images, and the CloudForms appliance did not have any time to gather meaningful consumption data at the moment. What we also say, even though it says chargeback at the moment, it is not really a chargeback. We would probably better say showback at this point, because we're talking about showing the customer the amount of resources he consumed and showing him what this means in monetary terms. However, we do not do charging, and we did not trigger specific account transactions here. So for example, looking at a report that had been created previously, we can see a number of virtual machines which are running. Those were pretty much idle most of the time, so we didn't incur much CPU cost. But for example, we incurred consumed memory, which is then associated with a dollar amount. And this is a report that could be created, for example, daily, so that I know daily what resources I consumed and how much they cost. Nice thing about this is I can even download this, for example, as a CSV file and then open it in a spreadsheet program of my choice to add additional calculations on top of that, so that you could easily create a whole calculation workflow for my own purposes out of that. or I could configure the system to just send it to me via email every time the report is being created. Now you can see a number of rates, dollar figures being applied here. Where does that information come from? It's probably, it is configured in this next section, this dialog. You can see the various different chargeback rules that apply here. Sorry. Here is in the rates, the rules are it. So we have configured rates for compute, for megahertz, and disk I/O and memory. We have defined a very simple rate here, a unit here, and basically that is what the CloudForms appliance uses to calculate dollar figures out of the consumed resources. And we've done a similar thing for storage, consumed gigabytes, cost $2 per month. Okay. That was metering and Showback. Billing is probably something, as I mentioned before, that is left to specialized billing engines or ERP systems. So we would take the consumption data from the reports and send that to a dedicated ERP system or billing engine via API call. So how does CloudForms actually know about their consumption data? What does it look like? In order to find out, we have to log into the system as an administrator. And we're only using the publicly available data from the actual underlying instances, so we're not doing anything specific here to gather that data. Rather, we're using the metrics supplied by the underlying infrastructures to calculate the consumption data. And let's just look in a specific underlying infrastructure provider. Just need to figure out where to move to. Just checking my notes, just a second. I'm going to infrastructures providers and look at the list of virtual machines. And here you can see a number of virtual machines running. The reason why I'm showing you this is actually the Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization environment that we are also using for this demo, which has a richer API at the moment. Red Hat OpenStack version 7 will provide a similar API to what Rev has today. So with OpenStack version 7, you can do what I'm doing in Rev now. So I'm looking at this virtual machine that we've created, which is called CD Look Busy. And here I'm moving now to utilization. And it takes a while for those images to be rendered because they're pretty much rendered live. And what I want to show you is the most recent hour. So what you see here is a very interesting graph of CPU utilization. That instance CD Look Busy does really look busy because we added a CPU load generator to it, which switches the CPU load basically every couple of minutes. So you can see a nice varying graph here. This is the data that is reported by the underlying infrastructure, and that is the data that CloudForms uses to then aggregate and to provide consumption metrics to the end user. And the nice thing is this is not only a feature to look at a very simple graph. We could also, for example, use that to identify problems. Just imagine you had a workload, a virtual machine that runs at points in time suspiciously slow. So you could log into your CloudForms appliance, you would open the capacity and utilization data from that virtual machine, and then you would use it, for example, to compare it to the underlying host. So I'm switching to an hourly interval. And I can compare it to the parent host. And what happens now is I get two graphs, one of them showing the utilization data for the virtual machine, and one of them showing the utilization data for the underlying host. And what would be interesting to see if there are specific spikes in the host utilization that might make my virtual machine slow. But there, as you can see here, there's almost no correlation between the utilization of the underlying host and the utilization of the virtual machine. So we can see that the host utilization does not have any impact on the virtual machine at this point. The other way to look at it would be, well, what happens? Are there significant spikes in the number of virtual machines, and does it affect the host in any way? And this could, for example, take place if a number of virtual machines suddenly start working at the same time. For example, if nightly batch jobs are all scheduled to run at midnight, to see if there's a significant impact on the utilization of the host at the same time, just to get a better understanding of correlations between host and the virtual machines all within that single pane of glass.